Hello there, and welcome to 30 Minutes Lawrence. My name is Ralph Galen. I'm a local activist and minister, and 30 Minutes is all about applying appreciative inquiry to empower individuals on their path of truth and justice. And today I'm very happy to have Susan McLaughlin back with us. Susan is a longtime friend. We've gone into the prison together for a brief while to teach, and we're on the board of the Criminal Justice Policy Coalition, in which you're the treasurer and you're involved in the mass bail fund and
Yep.
other things. And you have a long history of caring for prisoners and being involved in prison reform. And today we want you to speak unfiltered from your heart. And tell us what we might be able to do, how we can engage in criminal justice reform.
My pleasure. Hi, Ralph. Thank you. The last time I was here, I talked a little bit about what took me into the prisons in the first place. And I grew up in an environment that encouraged that, and I was really blessed by that. So that it's something I very much wanted to do. And now I've had an opportunity to do it. And in fact, this is timely because I've just decided that I need to take a time off from working inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working with the Justice Policy Coalition and doing street outreach, a clean needle exchange with a friend of ours. And just trying different things to see what feels like it can be the most effective.
So why is going in the prison not effective, and what was it like for you? What was it like to go into a prison?
I loved it. I was terrified the first time. There is that clanking of the doors behind you, and you go through a search, not an intimate search, but you have to open your mouth, show behind your ears, all sorts of things to show that you're not smuggling contraband in, and then go through kind of a warren down to wherever the classroom is that you're going to be in. And I think the biggest surprise I got was at Sousa Baranowski, which is one of the two supermax prisons in the state. It was my first class there. I got there, a room full of men, and the guard opened the door, scooted me in, and locked the door behind him as he left. And I was just stunned. I couldn't even talk, It was. He said, "Oh, there's an extension phone. Call down the hall if you need anything." And I thought, well, you asked for it. Here you are.
Did you have a button to push
No,
at
that
that
was
time?
before they had
Oh, my
the
gosh.
emergency things. So I had a pencil and paper, and that was it. But shortly after we got started, all of that went away, and it was just people in a room together, sharing ideas and laughing and having a good time. And so that's what I learned, is that
Having a good
what I already
time
knew.
Having a good time at the maximum security prison? What do you mean?
Bet. The class that I was teaching then was Houses of Healing. It's a book by a woman, Robin Kasarjian,
Yes.
on forgiveness, learning to forgive ourselves as well as others, and finding a spiritual path that will sustain us through our lives. And that's not a religious path, that's a spiritual path, whatever speaks to you as a way of being better connected, to the world, to people, to your community.
And did you find that the
So-
prisoners respond to that?
Oh, it was just wonderful. First of all, we started every session with a meditation, and they kind of course, poo-poo to meditation. But I would do a relaxation exercise where you started with your toes, and you concentrated there, and you worked your way up. And I had some guys doze off. They were on the night shift, so they'd be snoring over in a corner, and we had to wake them up. And then one fellow who came up and said he had never, ever felt that way in his life before. He didn't know what it was like
Letting
to
his
feel
guard down.
relaxed and to let his guard down. And he was going to hustle right back to his cell and practice, and so that kind of gratification of just seeing somebody experience something new that's so important for you. If ever you want to be able to learn how to sort of keep your bearings and chill, that's the place where you want to.
It's very difficult to do that, isn't it? Because the whole point is to be hyper-vigilant.
It
and
is.
You never know what to expect, and there's a lockdown, every day, it seems, at Sousa Baranowski. There's some, major incident.
Yeah,
They
a
lock
lot of
the place
violence.
down.
A lot of violence there. That's true. The mess hall is the most dangerous place, I guess, for people to be. So even while you're eating, while you're trying to, nourish yourself and nurture yourself, you're always just on the lookout for somebody behind you, beside you, and so forth. It's really, and a lot of these, I worked mainly with men. I did one class with women over at the pre-release to Framingham. MCI Framingham, but mostly with the men, and so many of those folks had grown up in houses where there was a lot of violence, so the hypervigilance came from there too as a child. They're always waiting for the next shoe to drop.
From childhood trauma, post-traumatic stress syndrome, even before they get out of high school.
So, but what did we laugh about? We laughed the same way. I'm in recovery. I've been in recovery for almost 22 years now. And there's a black humor in recovery and in prisons that is that I love myself. It's very, very dark. And so you find the most terrible things to laugh about. But if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. And you laugh together, not at each other. It's just an acknowledgement of we're all in the same boat together.
What's the point, Susan? This whole thing about coddling prisoners, they ought to be punished, and here you're going in and having a bunch of laughs with them.
Yeah.
What's that deal? Isn't prison about meting out a sentence, a punishment?
Our Puritan ethic is certainly alive and well in the prisons, and they get punished every day in a million small and large ways that are just dehumanizing, whether it's just having some guard poking you in the chest for nothing, or having your entire cell tossed, because somebody felt like you needed it. You needed to have to clean up, and humble yourself. It's one thing after another all day.
What about there being a reason why people are there and a reason why they're being punished, and through punishment saying these are the limits of your irresponsible life, criminal life.
That's kind of wrong-headed, because even punishment doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't work for children. It doesn't work for adults. It doesn't work for animals, dogs or horses or anybody else. What works is being taught a way that you fulfill that role and get some gratification and positive feedback for it. We know that's what works. Kids, adults, it doesn't matter. So we're just shooting ourselves in the foot by thinking that we're punishing, people. It does much more harm than good.
Is this shared by criminologists?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. They know that academically, but doing it, there's a whole culture of what they call the prison industrial complex, and that's what it is. You've got very powerful unions for the guards that make it impossible to do just common sense things. Because it would be against the union contract. You have
they're driven to be that punishing and harassing?
Well, I think that's part of the culture. A lot of these fellas come, and women, there are lots of women guards now where there didn't used to be, but they come directly from Iraq and Afghanistan as soldiers, and they move right into the prisons. It pays them well. It's a dependable, steady job that they have, and they know what they're doing. So they've been trained to, be good guards.
So you're asking people to change their spots without, and let's face it, it's a dangerous job. And it's a job where you don't want to let your guard down, so to speak. So the correctional officers are put into a very fearful situation where they're looking over their backs
They are.
all the time.
Yep.
And prisoners are spending their 2, 5, 10, 20 years resisting and finding the weak spots.
The weak spots.
So it's kind of like a formula for absolute disaster, especially given
is.
that correctional officers die around 55 years of age.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
Really?
and following more domestic violence, more alcoholism and drug use than the average population, surefire signs of extraordinary stress. And to take somebody from the battlefield and then plunk them down into a prison is not a restorative move.
Yeah.
But that's what's happening.
Yeah. They did the same thing in Worcester when they needed police. They recruited guys and they fast-tracked them through community policing training so that they could put them right out on the streets in Worcester. I mean, our thinking, I don't know, when you look at it closely, you have to question why we do things. And almost always it's the money. That's what drives things.
You had a great effect on the prisoners. Your showing up was just proof to them that they weren't utterly worthless people, and you were interested in them, and you made a heart-to-heart connection. Oh, I should ask, were you ever betrayed in your trust?
Oh, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, but the way in the more innocent ways, where you just go, oh, they got me, I had.
Did you expect it? Did you expect
I did
people
to
to
some
test
degree.
you?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, I would have if it was me. Same thing I would do. One time I got 3 original poems that were identical.
What are the odds of that, Susan? That is really miraculous.
I know. And when you confront them and go, come on, what do you think, I'm stupid? And they just look at you with this hangdog look like I've been nabbed.
So you left that for some reason.
I did.
You think
I
your
did.
energies are
I
better
got,
placed?
I was finding, I was developing resentments against particularly the guards and as well as the administration, and that's no good way to go in there. But I started hearing enough horror stories about what goes on inside that I just couldn't stand it anymore, and so I decided to try things on the outside. And
So what are you doing now?
well, let's see. I'm a member, as you said, of the Criminal Justice Policy Coalition. It's a group in Boston, a Boston-based nonprofit that seeks a more humane, just, and enlightened way of dealing with criminal justice, and including, not limited to, but including a lot of legislation. I'm not a big believer in legislation. Granted, the Civil Rights Law was a wonderful thing. The Voting Rights Act was a wonderful thing, but we can do so much better, and it's such a slow way to make any kind of progress.
Well, it's incremental. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the manacles off of pregnant women,
Yeah,
why they were there in the first place,
right.
and then we're going to campaign in Gardner to restore visiting hours, and then we're going to make sure that people get their Hep C medicine after years of deterioration. So it's incremental, it's spotty, and but I'm a big fan of something rather than nothing. But what's required is comprehensive reform. You know?
If you can even reform it, you know,
Okay.
it's so bad at such a deep level that I'm not sure these aren't Band-Aids and kind of feel-good fixes that continue to perpetuate what we call the prison industrial complex. I mean,
So
it's all about the money, you know. Lots of people make a lot of money on prisons, and the taxpayers lose a lot of money on prisons. The last number I heard was about $53,000 a year to house one prisoner, and that's not in solitary or anything special. That's just, you know, regular warehousing in the general population.
One of Deval
So-
Patrick's shining moments when he was governor toward the end of his term was to have a panel that promoted the results of Mass Inc., which concluded that after 20 years, people were not safer, and they didn't feel safer from all the draconian laws, mandatory minimums,
Yeah.
for instance, which create some real horror shows. You know, 3 strikes and you're out, and without looking at the infractions and tempering them in a context. But the problem there is with the district attorneys who are hell-bent on
Yeah.
perpetuating this system of punishment.
Well, it makes their lives a lot easier. If they can get somebody to plead out, they don't have to go to trial. They don't have to do any of that work. If they can intimidate them into taking a plea instead of risking the maximum, you know, for that, or the mandatory minimum rather, for that particular crime, then they've got a great win there. I would like to see we did it with the sheriff's races during this last round, where people developed a really good questionnaire to ask all the candidates in the sheriff's, very blunt questions about, you know, how they would deal with certain things. I would like to see that with the prosecutors next time around. I think that would be a great way to bring to light some of the things, the practices that are so unfortunate. Well, unfortunate's a kind word for it. But I wanted to go back to the legislation. Some of it really is positive. For instance, some of the things that are going on now are, well, they found that even though they passed the anti-shackling, and for people who don't know, this is women in labor are taken from the prisons to the hospital in shackles, not just handcuffs, shackles. Their legs are shackled together. Doctors have said that it's very dangerous for childbirth, for women to be, you know, handled and transported that way. But, you know, there's some big fear that a woman during labor pains is going to, you know, escape out the back of the ambulance. So although that's been a law now, they're finding in practice it's not only not followed in a variety of the state institutions that we have, it's not followed within a single prison, and it's not even followed among the personnel in a prison. Different COs will handle it differently. So you've got no consistency whatsoever, and they're not living up to the law that was passed in terms of how they'll handle this.
So if there were some monitoring to see how the law was being put into effect, and you spoke about that survey that put candidates' feet to the fire with the questions, why can't that be continued? Once we have a sheriff in place, why can't we have a scorecard for them and for prosecutors? Or is that happening?
I like that idea.
Or is this the job of Criminal Justice Policy Coalition to get behind the monitoring to see that things are properly implemented?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I like that idea of a scorecard. continuing, once somebody's in office.
Because we forget about prisoners.
We
They're the
do.
most shamed, blamed, and forgotten people in our culture.
They are.
And as I think it was Dostoevsky urged us to do, he urged us to evaluate our society by how we treat the least of these. And it is so easy for a prisoner to just disappear off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Connections to family are severed for a number of reasons. And the State Council on Government has come out and said that one of the areas that we can work in is recidivism. That nationally, Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow, is saying that 70% of prisoners return to prison. And so the implications of that is for communities to get involved, to restore family contacts, to restore the livelihood, if not dignity, of prisoners by treating them with respect and humanity, jobs, housing. All these things are stacked against prisoners. So there you have 70% of prisoners could be kept out of prison again.
The statistics are very helpful, but they can also be very misleading. And I think that's true in the criminal justice system, just the way it is anywhere else.
Is there a recidivism rate?
There is a recidivism rate, and
The
it's
punishment
very
didn't
high.
work?
The punishment didn't work, but you have to look at what recidivism is. What is considered recidivism? These folks are not going out necessarily and committing new crimes. They're very often probation violations, very often for the most asinine, petty. And they say, well, people have to learn how to follow the rules. But the whole process of hauling somebody out of a job they might have just gotten, out of housing where they have, all of the things that they've managed to construct in a brief time out of prison and throwing them back in jail because they flunked a P-test, or were late checking in from, the things that for all of us wouldn't matter anything, but they're determined to punish, even when somebody's out. It can be that they can't afford their probation fees. Now we're getting like the sports fees that parents have to pay for their kids to play sports in high school. Now we've got the same thing. We're doing it to prisoners. So they have to pay for the fees, and if they can't pay for them and they can't pay for their child support and so forth, they're back in the can again.
There's COSAs, Circles of Support and Accountability. Kim Yassir is promoting a program that is in Vermont, that is in Oregon, London, was funded in Canada, where people join, a returning citizen joins a circle of support, and they're there to intervene with the probation and parole, rather than saying, you failed this drug test, bam, back, to give some context and support. Like you say, so that this is a minor infraction that can be learned from and the person can stay out. And the other is Coming Home, which is a program that I'm promoting starting in congregations. And again, taking people back the way we used to do it in communities. I mean, where did people go? They went back to their town, and hopefully there were family. There was maybe religious groups that would. What are you going to do? Kick them off the edge of the earth? They're back. They made a mistake. Let's reintegrate them. And so in 1 minute, I want you to alert us to some of the legislation that's coming up that you would like us to contact our legislators about. Is compassionate care coming up?
Boy, you're really putting me on the spot with that one.
Okay.
And I don't have them off the...
Is mandatory minimums coming up
What
again?
I can say
Yes,
is that the UU Mass Action, which is an organization, part of the Unitarian Universalist congregations, has a website with the most incredibly detailed list of every piece of legislation coming up, who's sponsoring it, who is not signed up for it yet. And if you go there to uumassaction.org and look up your legislator and see where they stand on things, and see if you agree with where they stand on things, and then make some phone calls. It's really amazing what the phone calls do. You don't have to be some big organized group to go into the office and so forth, but phone calls, notes, even email is a really good way to reach people and let them know what you're thinking. And we do have that responsibility, I believe strongly.
Susan McLaughlin, I want to thank you very much for coming back. And I want to urge people to get in touch with cjpc.org, criminaljusticepolicy.org, which has an incredible calendar. And on the calendar is the remarkable Jenny Phillips film, Beyond the Wall, which is documenting Louis Diaz and other prisoners who've come out and have methods of rehabilitation. One is Billy's Barber Shop. And May 2nd, Concord Unitarian Universalist Church is going to be
That'll
showing.
be great.
And again, I want to urge people to go to uumassaction.org and realize that your voice does count. So thank you once again for tuning in. We thank Tom Gale and One World Community, and hope you tune in again. 30 Minutes Lawrence at gmail.com if you want to get in touch with me, Ralph Galen. Thank you. So much of it, Susan, is your voice, your presence, that somebody